Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we are back looking at the pasta developers for December 2020, and this time we're going to have a look at the aviation stuff. I just also want to wish you a happy new year. Hopefully you have a good one this year. Hopefully this year brings a lot of wonderful things, and at the same time I will be streaming later on today on Twitch, so if you want to hang out and basically just say happy new year to everybody, it's always nice to do so and make sure that everybody is here together. So let's get into it. Once again, thank you to Coke Spray and the team behind the Suggestions Pasta developers. It's always nice of them to put this list together for us. So the first one that is here is from Captain High Ground, and he's talking about the F-15, specifically the F-15A variant. Obviously there is a ton of different variants of the F-15. You've got all the way from F-15A to basically, well, the B, C, D, E, then the SE, the J, the DJ, the I, and the SA. But in this one, we're going to be focusing on the A, because that is the one that this is about. It's the initial production variant of the vehicle. It's a single-seat version with F100 PW100 engines, and it's an incredibly nice little aircraft. At the time, McDonnell Douglas created the F-15 Eagle. It was the most capable American fighter. It had advanced technologies and forward thinking, which made the design of the F-15 an excellent performing multi-role fighter, and it actually succeeded a plane we already have in game, the F-4 Phantom, and it was introduced in 1976. The F-15 was immediately feared by its enemies, and for very good reason. It at the time, or at one time during its history, had a kill-to-loss ratio of 100 to 0. This thing is incredibly powerful for what it is. The F-15's prototype was designated the YF-15A, which is standard for a lot of American aircraft, and the first productions models were the F-15A, which we see here. The main differences between all of the variants are different avionics and also different variants when it comes to single-seat variants and also two-seat variants, but the main thing with this one is obviously its engines. By the time it hit the B variant, it had the two-seater sorted, and then the C was another single-seat variant which had better engines, the F100 PW220s, and the D was just a two-seater variant of the F-15C. When it comes to the specifications of this machine, what you're looking at is an incredibly powerful piece. It had an operating weight of 27,500 pounds, but at the same time it could go over Mach 2 quite easily, and also had access to some pretty nice armaments. The primary armament on this machine was one M61A1 Vulcan 20mm, which you'll be very used to, the Vulcan in the game already, and it had a bunch of different loadouts and many different hardpoints, which were designed to carry sidewinders in the form of AIM-9Ps, Ls, and Ms, and also the Sparrows, the AIM-7Fs, or M's, which you can find around. I'm sure it was able to carry many more things as well, but at least right now, this would be the armament of the F-15A. Moving on, we then have something not from Tokyo, and this is looking at a GDR, so basically an East German vehicle, the Mig25ML. The Mig25ML, obviously being a Soviet vehicle, and it started life in 1978, when the USSR began production on the Mig25ML. It was going to be a lightened version of the Mig-23M in order to improve its maneuverability and also close air-to-air fighting, as well as improve upon other deficiencies that the model had. The base Mig-23 model was a variable wing jet fighter and developed in 1971, and it was basically developed in response to foreign variable wing experimental jets in development at the time, and sometime in the 1970s, East Germany received MiG-23s from the Soviet Union. the basic differences between the ML and other models were the empty weight was reduced, and then they also refined aerodynamics for less drag on the vehicle. They removed the dorsal fin extension and also a new G limit of 8.5, and a new R35F300 afterburning engine was used, plus the Sapphire 23ML N003 radar, plus also the Type 26 SH1 IRST and the ASP17ML radar HUD/gun sight. They also had a better data link in the form of the Laser 23SML, which would all be displayed on the hood. The improved Polyot 2321 navigation system was put in. It also had an improved radar, altimeter, a modernized flight control system, and also an improved autopilot. So basically they took a lot of stuff from the previous model and just upgraded it, especially when it comes to the avionics ideas. Then the MiG-23ML introduced an updated weapons control system as well, which meant that it could carry R-23Rs and R-23T missiles in the same flight, and also it allowed for one 23mm cannon pod, which could be equipped on each wing glove pylon. And apart from these additions, all previous armament options for all previous models could still be equipped with the ML. And then you have the MiG-23ML itself. This had a total of 6 hardpoints and also one twin-barrel GSH-23L cannon, which was embedded under the fuselage as part of the default firepower of the machine. The armament options from previous models did include some unidentified tactical nuclear weapons, and AA-2 ATOL missiles, AA-22 advanced ATOL missiles, and also R-60s, which this thing could carry. It's also briefly mentioned that the ML models definitely had air-to-ground engagement capabilities via rocket pods as well, and also had a few other things at the same time, and such as, you know, the K-13 missiles, which is the NATO designation. Well, the K-13 missiles, where AA-12 is the NATO designation for them, so that's basically where they come from. So this thing would be another machine which would have access to a ton of different ordnance and also would be a variable wing fighter. One of the things that is interesting is in War Thunder we don't have a variable wing fighter yet, but I think it's definitely on the cards for next year when it comes to the game, especially with what they've been doing with Top Tier recently. The next vehicle is from Piev, and it's of course the Mig25 Foxbat. The Mig25 Foxbat, I believe, has been passed before, but here we go again with it. Basically, the Soviet Export of Aviation Day, held on the 9th of July 1967 in Domodedovo, Moscow, was a celebration for scholars of modern military aircraft. Among the new models which stood out, a completely unknown two-turbine appliance whose performance had a great impact on the present observers. Obviously, this was going to be the MiG-25, the first public appearance of it at the time. It was going to be a new Soviet interceptor, which obviously when, you know, it came out, obviously every other country in the world just went, oh, what the hell is this thing? You know how it is. And basically the official designation for this thing was the MiG-25 by the Soviet Air Force, and until the mid-1980s it was still unaware of the code assigned to it by Mikoyan-Gurevich, although the E-226 may have meant the E-26 Model 6, and as is known from the history of the 25, the initial proposal for its development dates back to the late 1950s. By this time it was assumed that by about 1963 the US Air Force would be forming squadrons with the long bomber North American B-70 Valkyrie, which would have a ridiculous range and also Mach 3 speed, so therefore the Soviet Union would have to have something which would of course be able to deal with it. Unfortunately, you know, it wasn't as successful as as it was supposed to be. But anyway, we'll move on to other things. Basically, the MiG-25 was designed as just an out-and-out interceptor to be able to intercept mainly bombers, but also other stuff as it goes along. And also, when it comes to its general power, which is behind this thing, the choice of turbines was pretty simple. They wanted a simple, single-shaft, low-compression model with a large afterburner that gave most of its power to Mach 3. So they wanted to get this thing to Mach 3. The nearest Western equivalent was the de Havilland Gyron at the time, designed for the same function as the MiG-25, but cancelled by the British government in 1957 in the belief that the fighters were outdated. The Tumansky R-31 turbine would be looked at, including high-powered electric generators clustered at the bottom of the plane in sealed boxes around which the electronically programmed lower door secondary airflow would flow. And then near Mach 3, the air drawn into the turbines is cooled by a mixture of water and methanol, vaporized through external tubes, which would run from the root of the wing to a point upstream of the air intake. The main radar, which was used on it, was known as the Foxfire, and it's a typical 1950s high-powered device with a large number of valves and improperly housed in a number of boxes without the modular features that are easy to remove. It was an extremely high-powered one at 600 kilowatts, which surpassed the enemy ECM by brute force, and that was the general idea of it. And when we have a look at the basic weaponry of this thing, it would have 4 large air-to-air missiles, 2 radar-directed and 2 infrared. The usual type would be AA-6s or ACRIDs, and the radar version would be on the outer supports under the wings, and the infrared model with a blunt tapered nose in the internal positions. And alternatively, it could have 2 AA-7 Apexes or 2 AA-8 Aphids, which would be short range. The air-to-air missiles would be unsuitable for aircrafts whose purpose is to reach targets at great and safe distances without engaging in dogfights, where it would do worse because of its poor maneuverability. Remember, this thing was completely designed just to be an interceptor, not really anything else. So the idea that this thing would be able to dogfight efficiently is bupkis. Because it was a supersonic vehicle, surprisingly, it had a flat windshield on it, which provided an undistorted field ahead, with a view of a possible optional optical sight on it, which is kind of interesting. And after the July 1967 show, the MiG-25 began breaking records. On the 5th of October of that year, a Fedotov reached 30,000 meters with 2,000 kilos of cargo after a rocket-assisted takeoff, although such equipment was never seen on the aircraft. And on the same day, Komarov set a record for the 500-kilometer circuit, flying at 2,981 kilometers per hour, and other marks followed, culminating in remarkable time-to-height records. On the 4th of June 1973, Orlov, or B. Orlov, climbed to 20,000 meters in 2 minutes, 49 seconds, and 8 tenths, and P. Ostapenko reached 25,000 meters in 3 minutes, 12 seconds, and 6 tenths, which is kind of insane. This thing had ridiculous thrust on it. And then in 1970, the MiG-25 interceptors were in regular service, and a year later, they were reinforced by the first recognition version, which would be the NATO code Foxbat B, which was probably the MiG-25R. This device had slightly different wings, smaller wingspan, and straight leading edges on it. Basically, the basic interceptor had angled leading edge and lower wingtip curl. And instead of missiles, the MiG-25R carries 5 optical cameras, a side-facing radar, and numerous electronic devices such as a small nose mapping and navigation radar. And in 1971, 4 were taken to Egypt and flew over Israel several times out of reach of the F-4 Phantoms, which were armed with Sparrow missiles at the time, basically used as a recon aircraft. And generally, When it came to this vehicle, it was used for many different things. I know for a fact a lot of people were looking for this to be in the game at some point, and it would basically just be a very fast aircraft with not a lot else, unfortunately. You know, its actual dogfighting characteristics would be a little bit lacking. Maybe we'll see it at some point, maybe when we get supersonic bombers or something like that. We shall see at some point. The next one is from Flame2512, and we're talking about another variant of the Harrier, but this one is the Sea Harrier FRS1. Basically, this is an upgrade of some of the other Harriers we already have in game. Basically, the Sea Harrier FRS1 was a development of the Harrier GR3. It only had minimal changes between it and the GR3. The whole idea was to try and keep it as similar as possible, but make it so it would be able to be a carrier-borne fighter. The Sea Harrier has about 90% commonality with the Harrier GR3, with the aircraft being largely untouched, with the air intakes being backwards, with the exception of some components being switched for corrosion-resistant replacements. The Pegasus 104 engine in the Sea Harrier was essentially the same as the Pegasus 103 in the Harrier GR3, just with navalized components to prevent corrosion once again, because obviously you'll have to deal with different conditions. And the main differences between the Sea Harrier and the Harrier GR3, it was basically everything from the rear of the cockpit forwards, which was largely redesigned. The key addition was the Ferranti Blue Fox radar, which gave the Sea Harrier its distinctive pointed nose, and in addition to the Sea Harrier, the Sea Harrier received a new digital navigation and attack system, and the cockpit was entirely redesigned. The cockpit floor and pilot's seating were raised by 11 inches to allow room for the new avionics units under the floor, and this was coupled with a new bulged canopy that significantly improved rearward visibility, and other smaller changes were also made to the Sea Harrier, such as a more powerful reaction control system, and a slightly changed tailplane, and also a new ejection seat. So yeah, it's pretty similar to the vehicle itself, and the main difference between it and the GR3 would be the Blue Fox airborne radar, which was capable of detecting ships and aircrafts, but it did lack the look-down capability over land and also rough seas. The other thing it would also have, depending on if they decided to put in the Phase 1 upgrade to this thing, the Phase 1 upgrade did add a decent amount to the Harrier itself. Basically, it was a program which lasted from 1982 to 1987. Basically, when it came to the Sea Harrier, even though it had an excellent performance in the Falklands War did show a few issues with the aircraft itself, mainly the radar and air-to-air weapons loadout. So what they did with the Sea Harrier FA2, while it was in development, they decided to upgrade the FRS1 with the Phase 1 upgrade. And the main changes were so it was able to support 4 air-to-air missiles, either AIM-9Gs or AIM-9L sidewinders. So it would just be able to carry more sidewinders than before, and therefore giving it an increased combat capability. A beautiful plane, but not too much different compared to everything else. So yeah, it would be a pretty fun little plane to be in game, and with the addition of the Harriers, I mean, why not at the end of the day? I'd just like to thank John Ryman, Universe, Conte Baraka, Elove Goat, Trigger Hippie, Eugens Terry, Ambrosius McClellan, Daniel Stanton, Martinez B. Young, and also Hans Fagellen, Sebastian Mizon, and Samuel Schlick for supporting the channel.